Welcome to Accounting for Executives. This is a required course in the Masters of Business Administration at the Citadel. So it's an 8-week class. It's fully online. It's a required class for all of our students. The prerequisite for this class is BADM 703. So hopefully you've taken that already. I have designed the class to have 8 learning modules, so that 1 per week. Each module will have a case to complete, so you'll have 8 cases in total. And the first attempt at the case will be individual, so it'll be an individual assignment, and then you'll work in small teams during the later part of the week to create an updated solution to the case for your team. Hopefully a better, more accurate solution that you can put together as a team. So the reason I set it up that way is based on my experience with students working in teams, that oftentimes when you give a group assignment, they just divvy up the work and then put it back together and submit it. And I don't generally find that the quality is all that good, and oftentimes there's errors because nobody else is looking at certain components of the case. So what I do instead is have each student work the entire case on their own first, so that they come to the group meeting with a strong understanding of what the challenges are for the case, and also maximize their learning and understanding of all the moving pieces that are involved. So my experience has been that when you use this model, as opposed to the other model, you get much higher quality results, so much higher quality case solutions, and better thinking and better analysis by having students work this way. So I would budget about 5 to 6 hours a case. You could probably invest more than that if you want to. I'll talk briefly about some optional things that I've assigned. However, I think you should be able to get through each week with about that commitment. So as I said, each week there's 4 assignments. You have that individual piece first. Then there's a discussion assignment where you go back and forth with your team members, looking at each other's files, trying to come up with the best solution, best answers to each of the questions that are assigned. And then you refine the solutions as a group and submit that file. And then finally you have a case presentation. And that presentation of a case is not a presentation of the solution. I'm not looking for you to tell me in the presentation what the answers to the case were, the case questions. What I'm looking for you to do in that presentation is something very different, probably unique to you relative to other presentations you've done so far. And in this case, what I'm looking for is more of a reflection on what you learned and what information was given to you and why it was relevant. Perhaps what formulas. So really what I'm looking for you to do is to reflect upon what it is you should take away from the case or from the assignment, as opposed to what the answers are to the assignment. So a deeper reflection. There's more information about the presentation on Canvas, and we'll get to that towards the end of the first week. So as I mentioned, there is that weekly rhythm to the course because you're doing a case a week and the due dates are the exact same days of the week. So I would start by watching the video. So I'll create a video, try to keep it short as I can, a video of what I would find, what I want to convey to you are the most important aspects of the case, and maybe some of the strongest takeaways from the case, things I want you to really grapple with and think deeply about. So most of these cases tackle what I would call classic problems in management accounting. All right, so the video, and then I've also created a handout for you. It's a Word document, and that document contains the learning objectives for the case, as well as key terms and formulas. So it's a short document, 1 to 2 pages probably, maybe a couple of them are 3 pages, but they're fairly short. And then at the end of that Word file is a list of YouTube videos that I've recommended. That's the optional learning you can do if you have time. So for students who want a deeper understanding on the topics, you can watch those videos. So I have one particular person who I think does an outstanding job creating videos in this area, in this educational area. So I've just linked to his videos. Okay, so then as I said, you'll have those 4 case assignments. The individual component is always due on Wednesday of each week. The discussion and team assignment is due on Friday, and then the presentation will be Sunday. So it'll be the same every week. You'll have Wednesday due date for individual, Friday for team, and Sunday for presentation. All right, let's talk a little bit more deeply about the assignments. So for the first assignment, you'll be working individually by yourself to complete an Excel template that I created for each case. So inside that template, you'll find hints and checkpoints and structure. So I've actually, in many of the cases, done a lot of the front thinking for you, setting it up so that you know how to work through the numbers, which is probably the biggest challenge that students have. And that's why I want you to do the presentation, because I want you to go back and reflect on how those things, how it was set up, how you got the answers, not what the answers are, but how you got the answers and why they're important. All right, so you got an Excel template. You're going to complete that for the first assignment. The second and third, if you want to think of them together, because they're both due on Friday, both completed on Friday, is the discussion amongst the team members regarding the Excel template, and then the creation of a group Excel file, which can be either a brand new template that you want to start from scratch, or it can be one student's template that you feel is very close to being done. So you can pick from anyone on your team if you think their file looks really good, and then tweak it as a team, improve it, or incorporate things that other team members have found. All right, so you'll submit that on Friday, and then the fourth thing is that presentation. So that's a recorded Zoom presentation, or if you want to use some other platform, it's okay. I think I would prefer you use Zoom because it's such a popular platform. But if you really prefer something else, that's okay. Let me know. All right, so that's roughly all I want to say about the assignments that you had to tackle. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking to you about kind of a bigger concern I have regarding students' perception of companies. So in the MBA, for the most part, I would believe that you're studying for-profit companies. So that's very typical. It's a master's in business administration. You're going to be studying companies that are trying to make a profit, right? They're in business to make a profit, as opposed to studying government structures or nonprofit entities. Although you might find examples in your MBA where you're looking at that, it's not generally going to be most of the stuff you look at. So in my classes, I almost always look at for-profit examples. So I think it's important that we get this clear right at the front, and let's define the purpose of a publicly traded company. So this is one of the larger, doesn't have to be a super large company, but because we have small publicly traded companies, but just generally speaking, the publicly traded company, what's its purpose? And I want to start by asking you to think about, well, who's its stakeholders? And I've got a list here for you. Investors or owners, same thing. Creditors, which would be the banks. Customers, employees, government agencies like the IRS or the SEC or environmental agencies. The communities in which the companies reside or have an impact on, and the earth or environment. Okay, so one of the questions I like to ask students, because I think it's really important to make sure you got this figured out, is what is the primary purpose of a publicly traded company, and is there a hierarchy in that purpose? And so I want you to think of it in terms of those stakeholders we just listed. And 9 out of 10 times when I ask this question, students will say, well, the customers and employees are the primary purpose, serving them, providing them with products and services at a good price, reasonable quality for what you pay, with the features that you would expect to be competitive. Though that's the purpose of a publicly traded company. So oftentimes, 9 out of 10 times, I'll get students that'll say that, right? Which is not true. It is not the primary purpose of a publicly traded company. So let's make sure we get this clear right up front. The primary purpose is to provide an acceptable return to its investors, to the investors. So the investors at the top of that hierarchy. And it drives everything else that we do. And it's really important that you understand that, because the accounting information is being constructed in such a way to provide adequate information for measuring whether or not this has been achieved. The financial statements are not structured to figure out whether or not we've satisfied our customers. That takes more analysis, right, than what you're going to find in the financial statements. But the financial statements do provide the information, the accounting information necessary for allowing one to compute return statistics, right, or to do an analysis from outside the firm even, right? So if you're a stockholder in a company, you might only have access to their financial statements in their annual report, right? So there's only certain things they're required to publish, and then there's some things they choose to publish, which of course will probably be biased. But anyway, I want to get that straight right off the bat. It's not that customers and employees aren't important. They are, but the reason why we provide those goods and services to customers, and we treat them well, and we want their loyalty, and we want them to continue to buy our products and services, is because we're attempting to generate a reasonable return for our investors. And I want to also say this, that if you've taken business law or studied any of the cases where owners or investors, especially publicly traded firms, have filed lawsuits against the managers, and the managers are agents of the shareholders. They work for and they are agents of the shareholders. There's an agency relationship there. So shareholders can bring class action lawsuits against the managers if they feel the managers are not making decisions that maximize shareholder wealth. Right? So if they're squandering resources in some way that the shareholders feel doesn't support the long-term sustainability of the firm, they can bring a class action lawsuit. And several of those cases that I encourage you to look at, and can just Google, shareholder class action lawsuits. They're very interesting to read, and some of them date back long periods of time. So if you have some time and you're interested in this topic, I encourage you to check out some of those cases. So investors at the top of the heap, that's the primary purpose of a publicly traded firm, is to provide them with a return. And the creditors would be, I say, second, because if we do not make our payments to creditors, they can petition the courts and force us into bankruptcy. So they even, in my opinion, would come before customers and employees in that regard. Customers, of course, important to keep them happy, but the primary purpose is so that we can continue to generate sales, right? We want to be able to make money on them too. So this is something else I want to get clear. Sometimes students will say customers are always right, and that's not true either. We're going to look at a couple of cases in this class where our customers are actually costing us money. So we've got to decide if we're going to hang on to these customers or if we're going to try to turn them around in some way, right? Maybe even let them go if we don't feel we can do that. So you're going to do some analysis on customer profitability. Employees, of course, if things aren't going well and we're not making our sales targets and we don't have the operating capital to meet payroll, then we may find ourselves in a position where we have to lay people off. Everything is always done based on what it's doing to the bottom line, right? Government necessary to pay our taxes and follow the regulations. So there's some minimum requirements that we have there to keep the government entities off our back. And of course, we have social and corporate social responsibility to communities and of course to the environment. So there's environmental regulations we have to abide by for clean air and water and emissions. And then there's things that we can do above and beyond that. And again, I just caution you that companies do need to be careful that they are doing those things for the purpose of improving shareholder returns, right? So it's got to be in light of generating improvements in your reputation or generating customer loyalty or employee loyalty. So there's reasons for doing things above and beyond what regulatory agencies require you to do, right? All right. So anyways, in accounting, how do we measure that return? So in red there is your formula. Profit, some measure of profitability has to be in the numerator, and then the amount of investment that we have in the firm is in the denominator. So profits are generally found on the income statement, so net income, hopefully we'll learn that in 703. It's usually used as our profit figure. Oftentimes you'll make an adjustment to that profit amount to back out any interest expense or other types of costs that are not relevant to the calculation of returns to shareholders, because interest is a payment that's made to debt holders. So oftentimes little adjustments can be made, but let's just keep it simple for our sake. We'll use net income or some profit number, some bottom line number from the income statement. And investments I've seen calculated two ways. There's, again, you can tweak these based on preferences within your organization, but the two most common ways are to take total assets and subtract current liabilities from them. Another way of thinking about that is, if you look at the balance sheet, right, assets equals liabilities plus equity. So if you take total assets and you back off current liabilities, that has to equal what's left, because that is an equation that's always in balance. So what's left is long-term liabilities and equity. And if you think about it, those were the two primary stakeholders that I gave you in that hierarchy. Equity belongs to the shareholders, to the owners, and long-term liabilities are the creditors. Right? So the investment there, the denominator there, is the monies that are attributed to the creditors and the investors. Right? The money that they put up for this company. So let me give you a real simple example. Let's say we made $5, right? And we invested $100 for the year. Right? So we invested in January 1, $100, and during the year, for 12 months, we made $5. So that's a 5% return. Right? So how do we increase that? Well, we can either increase the amount of profits, holding our investments constant, or we can decrease our investment, holding our profits constant, or some combination of the two, increasing profits, decreasing investments. And that's not always easy to do, right? So to increase profit, we have to increase revenues and decrease expenses. We have to do one or the other, or both, holding the other constant, right? So, and sometimes that's difficult to do because of elasticities, right? So if you increase price, you might lose customers, lose volume. So if your product is elastic and you increase price, they're probably going to switch and go someplace else, right, if you have elasticity. So it's not always an easy thing to do, to increase profits. So most companies focus on decreasing expenses, right, trying to do what you do for less, right, improve your efficiency. And that's the other really important thing about a publicly traded firm. Right? It's one of the reasons why it's worked so well, is because it has that little tension in the system, right, where you're always trying to improve your efficiency and improve your operation. So that tension to provide a shareholder return motivates managers, right? And your salary and your position and your opportunity there motivates you to do a better job, and that might mean creating better product lines or services, or reducing costs and finding ways to do things more efficiently. So another big one that comes up is your capacity. So if you've invested in a lot of infrastructure, plant and equipment, and you've invested a lot of money and you're not at full capacity, then your expenses on a per unit basis are going to be relatively high, maybe compared to your competition if they are operating at capacity. So it's something you want to strive for, so that you haven't overinvested in your infrastructure, because that puts kind of a drag on your returns if you have too much invested relative to the amount of profit you're getting out of it. So how do you manage that? 3 things you can do here. Make sure you only invest in what you need when you need it. Don't overinvest. Make sure you discontinue unprofitable segments or product lines or regions. We call it negative net present value assets. And dispose of any idle assets if you can. Right, so those are just some ideas for improving your returns. Things we're going to be talking about in the class. All right, so accounting, I'm not looking to turn you into accountants. I'm looking to help you learn how to use accounting information and even create it so that you've got accurate information intelligence to support the choices that you're going to make. And again, the sole purpose of that is so that you can provide stronger returns to your investors. Those are the folks that have put up the money and taken the risk to get this firm off the ground. Okay, so sometimes that accounting information is available right in the financial statements. Other times you have to create it. In most of the cases that you're working on, you have to create it. So one of the main goals in this class is to teach you what's critical and how to set that up and why you'd want to set it up that way. So I'm very interested that you learn the why and not just the how when you tackle these problems. Okay. So most of the cases that we work on focus on the profitability aspect. And then when we get towards the end of the class, at the very end of the class, last case, we look at the investment side of the equation. Okay, so we'll work mostly on the profitability side, and that's on your income statement. Remember, your income statement is revenue minus expenses. And then I also need to teach you how to create what's called contribution margin income statement, which is a different type of statement that organizes the expenses based on their cost behavior. And we'll get right into that in the first case. Okay. Here's your 8 cases. So the first 3 are all about those cost behavior issues and doing break-even analysis and pricing decisions, and there's a lot of good meaty stuff. And then, as I promised you earlier, we'll get into these customer profitability analysis. So we'll look at some customers that maybe we could do a little better with. And then we jump into budgeting. So I'll give you a heads up. Case 6 is probably the longest case of this class. So that one you maybe want to give yourself a little extra time to do case 6. And then case 7 is more budgeting stuff, but then there's an ethical dilemma as well as incentive system. So we start picking away at what's a proper incentive system for a company to motivate its employees to get them to make the right choices. And then finally that last one, the last one is where we really jump into the ROI and residual income measures to help you calculate the returns. All right, so when I think about you and developing your executive skills, there's 3 things I think are super important. And the first one is competence. And I assume one of the reasons that you're in the MBA program is not just to get the credential, but to improve your competence. And I would say probably for a lot of students, getting more competent in the finance area is one of their main reasons for going back to school. They feel like they need more accounting background, finance background, to be able to make the kinds of decisions that really move an organization forward. All right, so competence. And I think in today's day and age and moving forward into the future, information competence or information intelligence is going to be one of the most important areas. So you need to be able to know what information is relevant, how to structure it, how to analyze it, how to be innovative with the data, to be able to gain strategies from that data or information that gives you some kind of competitive edge. That's where I see things going. And that requires that you understand the accounting information system really well, because that's where all your data is going to reside in that database. It's really a database. So it needs to be relevant. In other words, the information makes a difference in decisions. It needs to be timely. So a lot of firms don't have access to a lot of their data, or they don't have people who know how to manage data. And so you see a lot of companies now trying to hire or recruit data specialists. You see tons of jobs in that area. It's really good money. And of course, we need accurate data. So again, you're going to tackle that in the very first case. There's an issue where they put together some information from their accounting system, and they're trying to make decisions from it, and it's flawed. It needs a little tweaking, let me put it that way. So you'll be working on that. So then the second thing, beyond competence, is, in my opinion, the leadership and interpersonal skills are things you want to develop for your career. And self-awareness is where I would start with that. You can't really be a good, effective leader if you're not self-aware. And self-awareness means that you know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and you know how to mitigate your weaknesses, right? So, and I don't mean camouflage, I mean that you know how to fix them by either doing what you're doing now, getting more education and more competence, or by, here's not something else I want you to think about in the class, because oftentimes students will say, I don't have a strong accounting background, and it's really an area of weakness I know that I have. So they've done some self-reflection. So for me, it's more important for you that you know where it is that you're at, and that you strive in this class to make some measure of improvement, right? So you learn as much as you can from the class and take away as much as you can to fill in that hole that you might feel like you have. So that's what self-awareness is, and you fulfill those needs that you might have with your professional development. And then, of course, you got to take it to the next level and support others to achieve their goals. So the more competent you are, the more self-aware you are, the further down that pipeline you are, the more you're going to be able to support others and be an effective executive with strong leadership skills. Right? They kind of go hand in hand. And I give you opportunities in the class to work in teams. And again, it's like I mentioned to you earlier, you're going to be grappling with the cases. And you have to study it on your own first so that you're able to come to the table with a strong understanding of what the issues are and what the information is and what the tools are. And together you can really accomplish something. So you're going to be doing that on the discussion board where you're supporting each other and developing each other. And finally, an innovative, creative, expanded mindset or a can-do attitude, I think, is extremely important for an executive. Right? It's important that a company have the right leadership that's willing to take mitigated risks, planned risks, to achieve the next level for the organization, whatever that might be. Right? So if you are a publicly traded company or you work for a publicly traded company, that has to include some element of shareholder returns. You can't ignore that. It's got to be there. So it's always, when you get to be an executive level, that's going to be what drives you to do everything that you do, is maximizing shareholder wealth. It's why so many executives get paid with shares and stock options, because the shareholders want to align their top executives team to making sure that they're maximizing shareholder wealth. So it's their way of aligning executive interest with shareholder interest. Okay, there's your grading percentages, your distribution. So each piece that you work on in the cases is worth 20% each, and the final exam is also 20% of your grade. So you have a couple of icebreakers to do. Please start by introducing yourself. Maybe do a little bit of that self-awareness there. Reflect on what your goals are for the class and what you feel, if you've had accounting before, if you've not had accounting, don't be afraid to say so. That's why you're here, to develop yourself. And I think a big part of that is being self-aware. And then there's a second icebreaker activity as well, that you find your group and you discuss the required weekly assignments. I would suggest that you kind of try to put together a tentative plan for work that's got to get done as a team, and you delegate that work so that certain people aren't doing the same thing every week, but that it gets spread around and shared. So there are some tasks that you can share, but they're mostly logistical tasks. They're not the heavy critical thinking tasks that involve the case. They're more logistical. Like who's going to upload the file this week, and who's going to manage the team shared file, things of that nature. Who's going to make sure there's no typos in the written elements? Who's going to make sure the file name is based on the instructions and that it's saved correctly? So there's all kinds of little things that you could all contribute to create a final product. All right, I look forward to working with you, and if you have any questions about anything, please let me know.